Hello, I'm Anastasia Meyer, an agricultural economist with Nebraska Extension and the Center for Ag Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Today is part of our weekly webinar series, typically live every Thursday at noon. Find the schedule of upcoming webinars as well as the archive of every recording on our center's website at cap.unl.edu. Working closely with family is a big part of many farm and ranch businesses. This webinar will discuss effective strategies for conducting fruitful meetings for farm and ranch businesses. It will cover different types of meetings, meeting ground rules, decision-making strategies, and more. We hope you gain insights and practical tips to enhance communication and productivity in your family-run operation. To present, we're joined by Jessica Groskopf, an agriculture economist with Nebraska Extension and the Center for Ag Profitability. We invite you to submit any questions that you have during her presentation through the Q&A panel in your Zoom window, and we will address those at the end. Jessica, thank you for presenting today.
Thanks for having me, Anastasia. Well, good afternoon to everybody in the West or in the East, and we're so excited that you are joining us to discuss farm and ranch family business meetings. I want to take just a second before we get started to thank the North Central Extension Risk Management Education Center for the grant that they provided us to present today's webinar. We truly appreciate their support, and this is a part of a much larger grant that's looking at bringing the younger generation back into their family operation. So thank you to North Central Extension Risk Management. As you heard in the introduction, about 97% of farms and ranches in the U.S. are family owned. And this creates a really unique challenge for farm and ranch businesses as we think about what happens when we come together to have a meeting, right? Sometimes the lines between family and business get blurred, and that can make it really difficult to have fruitful meetings. So today I'm going to ask you to create a little bit of separation in the events, activities, and discussions that you have, and really think about, is this a family event, meeting, or discussion, or is it a business event, meeting, or discussion? And we really need to kind of create that separation for farm and ranch businesses. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, well, Jessica, my family meets all the time. We get together on Sunday afternoons and we have dinner together and, we're meeting. The reality is that's one of those moments where you're blending family and business. And I think somebody might choke a little bit over their fried chicken if you asked how, the family farm finances were at that meeting. So I think it's really important that we think about setting the stage so that we can truly have honest discussions about the business. Now, a few more of you that are joining us today might be saying, well, Jessica, we meet all the time, but it's not over family dinner. But we meet every few days and we go over what's happening in our business. And although this too is a great way to build communication and relationships, it might not be the best way to get to discussing management decisions and the strategic direction of the business. So I think about meetings, and when I think about them, I think about the fact that there are really three types of meetings that a farmer or ranch business may be having. So the first type of meeting is an operational meeting. Then we'll step up and become more formal and talk about management meetings. And the most formal type of meeting that we will have as a farmer or ranch business is a business meeting. So let's start back on operational meetings. So again, this is the most informal meeting that you will have. And often these happen weekly or every few days. And it involves anyone who is involved in the day-to-day business of the operation. So it might be family, but it also might be employees. And really, these operational meetings answer the question, what needs to be done, right? So that's an interesting moment where we're not really asking for input or maybe minimum input we're really not making big decisions, and we're definitely not discussing the strategic direction of the farm or the ranch. We're saying this field needs to be sprayed, these cows need to come in and be processed, et cetera, et cetera. So those are those operational meetings. Next, we have what we call management meetings, and these are a step up in formality. Maybe you'll have these monthly or quarterly, and this will include the owners and managers of the business. So this is where we're really discussing those management decisions. So something like, what is our chemical program going to be this year? Which cows need to be culled? What does our operating note or line of credit look like? Those types of management discussions are really only happening between those owners and managers. The third and most formal type of meeting is that business meeting, and it's going to happen probably on an annual basis. Now, this type of meeting usually involves stakeholders, and I'm going to define stakeholders here in just a little bit, but this meeting is the meeting where we talk about strategic direction. So what's happening within the business, and not necessarily that nitty-gritty production decision, but more about the broader picture of the business as a whole. So again, I think all three types of meetings are important to farm and ranch families. I think we're really good at operational meetings. Some of us are doing management meetings, but I would love to see more and more families be involved in true business meetings. So let's talk about the players within these types of meetings. So owners are people who own farm and ranch entities or assets, and they often have the most decision-making power within the business. In a lot of families, below the owners, we have what we call managers, and they're responsible for overseeing the daily operations of the business, and they may hold some decision-making power. So typically in a farm or ranch family, what I see is that oldest generation are the owners. They really hold the reins to the business. But then we might have a younger generation or a second generation in there that maybe they don't own assets, or they own fewer assets than the owners of the business, but they're the ones who are really calling the shots in terms of the management and day-to-day operations of that business. So again, owners own the bulk of the assets, managers have some decision-making power. But then as we think about our farmer or ranch families, there are all of these other people who have a vested interest in the business and what's happening within that business, even though they aren't calling those shots day to day, or they don't own assets within that business. So we're going to call these people stakeholders. And often stakeholders are heirs who are expecting to inherit assets. So maybe these are children and grandchildren of managers or owners. Maybe there's in-laws. I happen to be an in-law in our family farm. And so even though I'm not an owner and I'm not a manager, I still am worried about what is going to happen to the strategic direction of that business. In some cases, you may also have business partners, right, who have a stake within that business. So we have to think about that stakeholders as that kind of third tier of people who may be involved in that business. So again, owners are probably the smallest population. We grow a little bit with managers, and finally we have stakeholders of that farm or that ranch business. So oftentimes I have people who are usually in that stakeholder and that manager position coming to me and saying, Jessica, I need your help. I need to get that oldest generation, that owner generation. We need to start having family business meetings. We need to start having them. And my comment back to them is, you can't push a rope. You can't push a rope. And what I mean by that is that owners really do need to take charge of these meetings, especially when we get to that business meeting level. When we're talking about the strategic direction of a farm or a ranch, we really need that owner generation to be the ones who are accepting of hosting this meeting and are willing to hold people accountable to the decisions that are made in that meeting. Now, I might be able to get that owner generation to a family business meeting. But if they don't agree with the decisions that are being made within that family business meeting, they're not going to hold people accountable to those decisions. So we've, in some ways, wasted our time if that owner generation is not the one that is coming to the table to have these types of meetings. So I know that's a difficult thing to discuss, but I think there's some opportunities for us to build up to family business meetings and help that owner generation come to those family business meetings without pushing them into that family business meeting. So the way that we do that is we start with those really simple operational meetings, then we build to management meetings. And often we will see that as we go through that process, we build trust with one another, we can get to family business meetings. Family business meetings often come up when we discuss transition planning. So this is really where family business meetings become very, very important. However, it's a lot easier, like I said, to get to a family business meeting when you've had those operational and those management meetings all along, or you've had family business meetings that don't just focus on the transition planning process. So why do we need these meetings? In some cases, they're required. And if you have a corporate entity or a corporate structure, oftentimes your articles of incorporation will require you to host these meetings. And I'll talk more about that on the next slide. Some research done by Dr. David Cole back in the 1990s, and I know that's a little bit older data, but I still think it could hold true, says that families that hold regular business meetings are about 20% more profitable than families that don't. So we know that there's some opportunities to improve our business if we're holding regular family business meetings. And again, it's about that strategic planning process that allows us to move up. And with all types of meetings, this allows us to practice good communication, right? We're building trust, strengthening relationships, and over time, it can make some of those more difficult conversations that come up, like in the transition planning process, easier because we're used to conversing with one another and we kind of know the ground rules of how to interact with each other. So if you have an entity that has articles of incorporation or an operating agreement, it may outline details of how business meetings within that corporation should be conducted. And it might even include things like the date, time, purpose, place, notice requirement, and other specifications of that annual meeting. This is extraordinarily important. I see lots of families who have an entity structure that are not conducting annual business meetings and are not writing those minutes. And I think it's important for you to know that you could lose your legal status of a corporation if these meetings are not regularly held and the minutes are not filed. So please make sure that if you have one of these entity structures, that you are going through the process of not only holding the meeting, but making sure that those minutes are kept and filed. If you'd like to know more about this, there's an entire article on our cap.unl.edu website that goes through what you need to host family business meetings. You can use your phone and scan that little QR code there on the bottom left hand of your screen, and that will help you with that. And Ryan also put that in the chat just in case you wanted to link to that article now. So as we move forward, right, we've decided, okay, we need to have business meetings, right? Maybe we can move up from just those operational meetings. And now we're thinking maybe even about a management meeting or a business meeting. We need to develop a plan. And what we're looking for in this plan is thinking through the process so that we can either choose order or we can choose chaos, right? And so this plan is going to kind of get us to have more order and more structure as we host these family business meetings. The first thing that you need to start with is the purpose of the meeting. What is the purpose? What do you intend to accomplish with this meeting? Is it bringing everyone up to speed on what the status of the business is? How are they doing financially? Is it discussing how the previous year went? And there's kind of a few categories that we like to lump the purpose into. That purpose could be idea gathering, it could be distributing information, or it could be problem solving. But it's really important for us to identify this purpose first, because we're going to make sure that we come back to that purpose multiple times as we plan and we execute this meeting. Next, we have to, again, bring the owners. The owners have to be the ones that drive this meeting. So the owners are going to decide, as we're planning for that first meeting, who is in attendance. And that's really asking yourself, who are the stakeholders within that business? Again, business partners, siblings, on-farm and off-farm, heirs, in-laws, children, or grandchildren, who all have a stake within that business. Next, we're going to discuss and decide about speaking and input privileges. So again, are you just gathering ideas, or are attendees making decisions, and who can speak during that process? And finally, the big piece that we need to decide here is who has decision-making power. Are we gathering input, and that decision-making power ultimately ends up with those owners, or will there be some sort of voting privileges that are given? Now, again, we need to go back to those articles of incorporation or that operating agreement, because that decision-making power may be outlined within that document. As we decide this, who's involved, who has the right to speak, and who has the decision-making power, we need to think about what this does to the family dynamic. This is very important, and I really encourage you, as that owner generation, to sit and think about how this is going to affect people. So I'm going to give you an example. I am the daughter-in-law of a fourth generation farm. So what is that dynamic like if in-laws are not allowed into that meeting? What is that dynamic if I'm not allowed to provide input? What is that dynamic if I'm not allowed decision-making power? Now, you may be limiting who's involved, who has speaking privileges, and who has voting power to avoid chaos, but do know that it is going to change the dynamic. So really think through how you are going to approach these decisions. This is crucially important. What we see in a lot of families is that if you are a stakeholder, especially if we're discussing something like farm estate and transition planning, you are allowed to attend the meeting. As far as speaking or input privileges go, we might limit the number of times that someone can speak or the amount of time that someone can speak, but everyone within that meeting can speak. But then the decision-making power is limited either to owners or to heirs who have a stake within the business. Okay? So think about this in terms of the family dynamic, because this is where a lot of things can fall apart. We can be too limited or we can be too wide, and it really depends on your family. So really think through this process and how you want to set up this structure so that it provides people with a sense of belonging without creating chaos within the meeting. So when we're planning the first meeting, those owners, I'm still going to put this on you. You need to directly communicate the first date, time, location, and purpose of the meeting. Okay? So you are going to be the one that calls and says, "Hi, son or daughter, I would like to have a family business meeting. Here's the date and time." Okay? And this is what the intent of that meeting is for. A couple of recommendations here. Please do not do this on a holiday or really close to a holiday. Okay? I know it's probably easy to say, well, we're all going to be around for Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving, and that can make this really difficult. So maybe, put a day in between, so if we're going to be together for Thanksgiving, maybe it's the Saturday after Thanksgiving when everyone's still around, but we had time to enjoy that holiday. Make sure that this meeting is not too long. I think most of the time about 2 hours is when people start to check out. So make sure that you have a solid beginning and ending time. You allow for enough time, but don't make it too long. And again, we're going to put out that purpose right from the beginning. So we're setting expectations right from the get-go what the purpose of that meeting is. So again, those kind of big categories are idea gathering, distributing information, or problem solving. You need to set a comfortable, neutral location for this meeting, preferably not the kitchen table. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. And you need to develop and share that agenda ahead of time. You need to provide a way for people to add items to the agenda ahead of time. And then you also need to provide any additional documentation that will help support that conversation, especially if that is kind of one of those problem solving or idea gathering meetings. They need to know what is going to be discussed and have that information in front of them. So let's talk about the kitchen table for just a moment. And I think a lot of families, again, say, well, we have meetings all the time. We sit around the kitchen table and we discuss what's happening within the farm or the ranch business. And I argue that by sitting down at the kitchen table, families are defaulting to that family mode and not that business mode. So, right, dad sits at the head of the table. Me and my sister sit where we sat when we were little kids. Mom is probably up making sure that everybody's coffee is filled or is clearing plates off the table because we just finished with breakfast or lunch. And really it excludes potentially those other stakeholders. So maybe there's not enough chairs for the in-laws. We really want to avoid the kitchen table because again, it just puts us into family mode rather than putting us into business mode. So I would really encourage you as you are planning out this meeting, think about comfortable neutral locations within your community that you could use for a meeting. So I'm going to put a plug in here for Nebraska Extension. Many Nebraska Extension offices in your county have boardrooms that you can use. Your local bank might have one. Your attorney's office might have one. Think about your local library. They're also a great resource to create that comfortable neutral location where everybody's kind of on even playing field when it comes to this meeting. So really encourage you to get out of the kitchen and out from around the kitchen table for these family business meetings. Get everybody into business mode, not just into family mode. Next, you need to prepare for that meeting. So again, we're going to provide that agenda and we're going to provide those additional documents. And if you get invited to a family business meeting, you need to be prepared and have some ideas of what's going on and make sure that you have reviewed any documentation that has been provided. So now we're ready to hop into our first meeting and a couple of agenda items that I think really need to be on that first meeting agenda. Number one, it's going to more than likely be led by the owner of that farm or that ranch business, and they're going to reiterate the purpose of the meeting. Number two, I think you need to set and agree to ground rules. This is really important, again, to get us into business mode and out of family mode. And then we're going to hop into those topics for discussion. So again, we identified the purpose and maybe we have a handful of items that we are going to discuss. And finally, before you leave that first meeting, you need to set the date and time of the next meeting. This is very important. Once you have that momentum, you've got all the stakeholders around the table, you need to keep that momentum going by setting the date and time of the next meeting. There might be topics that come up that don't get discussed. There also might be that opportunity to, while everybody's together, for everyone to look at their calendar and say, yes, that works for us. Now, I find it difficult when I work with farm and ranch families that we have to set ground rules of how they talk to one another. And I think it's really important. I think sometimes people say, oh, we don't need those, and others are going, yes, we need them. So I really encourage you, even if you're not sure that you need some ground rules, that you do set some kind of general code of conduct that happens within that meeting that again elevates it to that business discussion kind of behavior. So number one is that these business meetings are business meetings, which means that they're a safe space, no teasing, yelling, or criticizing one another during the business meeting. I also think there should be a kind of a no gossip rule, and this might be a no meeting before the meeting or meeting after the meeting rule. So I think sometimes what happens in families, especially large families, is someone will call and say, "Did you hear what so-and-so said?" Or "Dad's going to discuss this. I heard X." We need to squash that, right? And make sure that what needs to be discussed in the meeting is discussed in the meeting, not before or after. Sometimes we have challenges within families that some people maybe talk more than others. So you might have ground rules 3 or 4 or both. 3 is a gag rule that says we're going to limit the amount of time or number of times someone can speak on a topic. Okay, so again, let's say we allow all the stakeholders into the room, but we're only going to allow everyone to speak once or twice on a topic, or only speak for 30 seconds on a topic. That kind of forces those over talkers to really think about what they're going to say and really get down to the nitty-gritty of what they're going to say, because they know they're limited. Number 4 really helps if someone tends to interrupt, right? So that ground rule is just, again, creating structure and avoiding that chaos. Number 5 is for my silent people. A lot of times when we bring multiple generations into a family business meeting, you'll have that one person who simply will not talk. And that can be a challenge for everyone because you're not sure what they're thinking. Do they agree? Do they not agree? What's going on? So a ground rule to help manage that is to say that if you are silent on a topic, we are going to assume that silence equals acceptance. So again, encouraging them to speak their mind about what is happening. And again, these ground rules help us create structure. They also help us build trust with one another and hopefully improve that communication. So your family might not need all of these ground rules, and they might need some different ground rules. But as you go through that first meeting, after we've discussed the purpose, the next item on the agenda is ground rules. I think it's extraordinarily important that these are in place. And again, if we've sent that agenda out ahead of time, everyone who's going to be in that meeting can think about what do those ground rules need to look like, and they're going to be different for every family. So during that business meeting, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to respect the beginning and the ending time. So again, we need to be really thoughtful. Do we have enough time to get through the agenda? So don't set our agenda so lofty that we aren't able to really discuss those topics on that agenda within the time frame that we have set. We're going to follow that agenda. I would really encourage you not to allow surprise topics to get added to that agenda. A lot of times within farm and ranch families, we have a lot of different personalities, and it's very common for one of those personalities to need information ahead of time in order to be able to make a decision. So if we allow a surprise topic to come up, then that person doesn't have time to process, and they will kind of shut down in that meeting. So instead of allowing that surprise topic to be discussed, we're going to add it to the next meeting's agenda if possible, or we're going to set another meeting to discuss that surprise topic. So let's say we're doing annual business meetings and that's kind of the plan, but this topic comes up. Maybe we'll do one a few days later after we've had some time to digest about that topic and get some more information about that topic. But we're not going to let a surprise topic fly without the necessary information, and allowing especially those personalities that need a little bit more time to process that time. Okay. The last thing that we're going to do, at least on this slide during this family business meeting, is we're going to discuss business by using facts or metrics. So if we're discussing the financial position of the business, we're not discussing that from an emotional standpoint. We are looking at balance sheets, we're looking at ratios, we're looking at cash flows, and we're really discussing the facts about the business. This is a point where we may want to bring in advisors when necessary to discuss those facts. So I'm not turning to that advisor to say, I need you to, tell my family about all of the nitty-gritty details. We're bringing those advisors in to answer questions about the facts that have already been presented. So maybe you have somebody who doesn't understand working capital or current ratio. Having that advisor there to describe that, but they are not necessarily in that decision-making capacity. They're there as an advisor. Okay? So again, use facts and metrics to discuss the business. A few more things during the business meeting. Make sure that action steps are assigned with deadlines. I think a lot of times we go into these meetings, especially if it is a kind of a decision-making meeting, and we forget to say, okay, who's in charge of that and when is that due? Again, we're trying to build trust and we're trying to move the business forward. And so during that meeting, we need to really underline what are the action steps, who is going to take care of it, and what is the deadline. You should be taking notes or minutes of the meeting. And again, it might be required by your entity structure that these minutes are filed. Okay, so make sure that someone is taking notes or minutes. I would really encourage you to rotate the note-taking responsibilities. Do not just default it to mom or another female member of your family. I think it's important that that responsibility gets rotated a little bit. Now, will dad's handwriting be as pretty? Probably not. But that will allow, by rotating that note-taking responsibility, it will make sure that they have the opportunity to really engage in the conversation and engage in that family business meeting. We often see the person who's taking notes doesn't always have time to hop in and do the discussion often. Okay, so by rotating it, we're not limiting just one person, limiting their ability to discuss. We also need to make sure that there's a plan for review and distribution of those minutes. It does no good if those, notes are written on a notepad and shoved in a drawer, and none of those stakeholders get to see those notes ever again. And finally, we've already discussed this. You absolutely need to set the date and time of the next meeting. It has been recommended, I have seen other people recommend that one way to take notes would be to do them on a large flip chart. This kind of allows everybody to see what the notes are and then snap pictures of those notes on the flip chart. So that can be a note-taking method that's a little bit bigger and might be a method that works for you and your family. So throughout the business meeting, what we're really looking for is we're really looking for the opportunity to generate discussion. So this requires us to ask really powerful questions. And what you want to avoid is yes/no questions. And I'm going to be honest, the first time I was involved in a family business meeting with all the stakeholders for our operation, the question that was posed was a yes/no question. The first question out of the gate was, do you want to see this farm or ranch continue? And the answer around the room was yes. And it didn't go any farther than that. And it didn't do us any good. What should have been asked, and what I wish I would have had the courage to ask, was, what role do you see in the future of this operation? So what role will you play in the future of this operation? See how that's a very different question from, do you want this to continue, versus where do you see yourself and how are you going to contribute to the future of this business? So again, this kind of comes in the preparation piece, where you need to kind of have some questions that you are thinking about that you want to ask related to the topic. So again, if we're asking about a particular piece of property, ideally, what would you like to see happen with, the home place? Or what is your solution to this problem? Okay. A really set of powerful questions to ask, especially if you're in the transition planning process. What do you need? What do you want? What do you fear? And what do you expect? And another way to generate more discussion is tell me more about that. Okay. So again, we're looking for ways that we can really generate discussion within the business. So I want to take a little bit more time for those of you who have an entity structure and you need to provide kind of, I'm going to call them professional minutes. Here's the kinds of things that you need to include in your meeting minutes. It can be really simple. Date, time, and location, who chaired the meeting, who was in attendance, include that agenda, include any motions that were made, and then how the vote went, and then list any topics were discussed. You can kind of list that out. Finally, any actions by the board and when the meeting adjourned. So that's kind of a basic outline. Again, that's in that same article that Ryan shared a little bit earlier in the chat box. So you are welcome to revisit that complete article there on our website, cap.unl.edu. So now that we've had this meeting, we need to think about what are we going to do after the meeting. Okay? So after the meeting, number one, don't have a meeting after the meeting, right? When the meeting is adjourned, we can talk about family things, but we're not going to discuss what happened within that meeting. We're going to make sure that we distribute those minutes. However, we decided to everyone, we're going to follow up on tasks and assignments, and then we're going to prepare for that upcoming meeting. So now I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've been talking for almost 40 minutes now, and I've given you a lot of information. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you about a minute to write down a really kind of brief plan for a family business meeting. So during that time, I want you to think about who are the stakeholders, what's a possible location, what are some possible topics. So again, I am going to be quiet here for the next minute while you write down your plan. Well, thank you for taking that time to write that down. I have just a few more slides to share with you today, but I would encourage you, if you have any questions as we go through these last few slides, go ahead and start putting those in the chat or in the Q&A. We're happy to answer those at the end of today's webinar. So the reality is that the most critical challenges that you are going to face are family issues. And so as you prepare for this, think about how you can manage some of those family issues. We had a great webinar in June of 2022 with Alex Chan from the University of Maryland. I would really encourage you, if you're not sure how to have those difficult conversations, that you go back and you check out that webinar. Again, you can scan the QR code on your screen to view that webinar, and it will really help you prepare for family business meetings, especially when you are having difficult conversations or have a strained relationship with somebody within your family. The other webinar I would encourage you to go back and watch is one from May of this year with Lisa Caslon. It talks about mastering effective communication and has more communication tips and tricks that may be useful to you as you prepare for those family business meetings. I would also encourage you to check out the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. Our Department of Agriculture has what they call the negotiations program, and they provide mediation for families now that can help with resolving differences through discussion, negotiation, and problem solving. So you may be in a situation where maybe a family business meeting is not what you need. What you truly need is potentially a mediator. So I would encourage you to reach out to the Nebraska Department of Agriculture for those mediation services. So some final thoughts as we wrap up today. I would really like to encourage you to say that there is hope for your family. You may be in a position where family business meetings might be a challenge, but they're an important part of building that trust and communication within your family. We also know that when we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. So starting these family business meetings will help us with those difficult conversations. And again, we want to be a functioning farm or ranch business. And finally, being clear is being kind. And I can't emphasize that enough. And being unclear is being unkind. So as we go into these family business meetings, our goal should be clear with our expectations of why we're hosting a meeting and also the agenda items on that meeting. Just a couple of other items that I want to bring to your attention. If you are that younger generation looking to come back to the farm or the ranch business, we are going to be hosting a Returning to the Farm workshop in March of 2025. We'll be announcing that location soon, but if you would like help, maybe setting up that first family business meeting or starting those more difficult conversations of you returning to that business or, stepping into more management role within that business, I really would encourage you and your family to attend the Returning to the Farm workshop. Another opportunity through the University of Nebraska is the Nebraska Land Link program. You may be thinking about the fact that maybe you don't have an heir coming back to take over that business. And the Nebraska Land Link connects landowners with new and beginning producers, which we call land seekers. So that's another opportunity and service that we provide here at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln that might help you as you start thinking about this process. So with that, I've got my contact information on the screen, and I'm happy to take any questions that have come through the chat or the Q&A.
Jessica, it was requested that you show the screen with the questions again.
Okay. We can go back to that. Sorry. Hopefully don't make anybody sick doing that. This one, the generate discussions.
If that's not the right slide, let us know. We do have one question so far. What's the best way to distribute minutes and how soon after the meeting should this be done? Should the minutes also be shared at the next meeting for approval?
Yeah, so I really think the how should they be shared depends on your operation and your business, right? It's kind of the same discussion of, is a text message okay? Is an email okay? I know some families who post them like in the shop so that everybody has access to them. Again, I think you need to discuss that as a family of how are we going to distribute these minutes. I think it should be done fairly quickly after the meeting, 48 hours after the meeting so that we have an idea of what those minutes are. And then yes, if you have, especially if you have a corporate entity structure, you should probably be approving and filing those minutes as a part of your next meeting. So again, I think it depends on your family and your entity structure, which is going to determine how formal we have to be with those minutes. But I can see a digital version as well as a printed copy. And then if you have an entity structure, it might help you to file those with your attorney or put them on file, maybe in a safety deposit box or somewhere, so that you have access to those past versions of that, just in case you would ever need them for legal purposes. But again, I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. So check with your attorney about, if you have one of those entity structures, how you should handle those documents.
We did get another request for another view of the slide on the negotiations.
Absolutely.
While you are finding that, we have a couple more questions. What do you do with the family member who will be upset? Leaving is not an option.
Yeah, so again, we're looking for ways to build trust and communication with one another. And so setting those ground rules around a business meeting are really, really important, and thinking about how we manage those emotions and those feelings within that is the key to success. And it's really going to depend on your family. So sometimes I think we have to have those difficult conversations knowing that someone is going to be upset, but we're going to do everything we can to prepare for the meeting and manage those emotions through the meeting by setting really strong ground rules about how we're going to handle that. Again, if you're in a situation where you think a family business meeting is going to end in chaos, right? Somebody's going to walk out, something like that. There's a couple of strategies that we could use. Number one would be, do we need negotiation rather than a family business meeting? Number two could be, do we need a facilitator in that meeting? So it's not just that owner generation that's there. It's kind of this neutral third party who's there facilitating those efforts. So that could also be a possibility of bringing somebody else into the situation who can help with that process.
What about involving tenants in any family meetings?
So again, I think it depends on the relationship with the tenant and whether or not we view them as stakeholders. So if, for example, maybe they have a buy-sell agreement, maybe there's something, longer term relationship than just a typical, 1-year lease. Yes, it might behoove us to include those tenants. But I don't see it as a typical thing. But if you feel like it's an important part of the discussion of the business moving forward and you consider them a stakeholder, they should be invited.
Okay. Last question that we have so far. So if you have any extra questions, go ahead and start typing them in. Is what if mother and sister inherit and are owners but do not get along? Daughter does most of the managing. How to bring both parties into the leadership role, and who, let's see, would I pick one? So I'm assuming this is not mother or sister.
Yeah, so this goes back to you can't push a rope, right? So I think it's very difficult for someone who's not in that ownership position to say, well, we need to have a family business meeting. Again, you're probably looking at some sort of facilitator to help facilitate conversations or negotiations to move that business forward. And I think that's where it's really important for those of you, maybe you aren't in a contentious situation yet. Maybe you're not talking about estate planning, or you're kind of in a neutral mode within your business. Starting these types of meetings now, even just those operational and management meetings, and leading into those business meetings, when something difficult happens, like someone passes away, it's much easier to continue those meetings, and you've already built trust within that farm or that ranch business. So it's a lot easier, right, to kind of move that management around. Now, if they're both owners, the law is going to dictate that management. So again, but they as owners have to be the ones that come to the table and decide how they're going to work with one another and facilitate things. So if mom's an owner but daughter's making the decisions, as long as they're okay with that arrangement, that's fine. That would have to be a legal consideration though, if they want to change that.
Are there any last minute questions? If not, thank you everyone for joining us today. A recording of this webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu. You can also register for other upcoming webinars. We would also really appreciate your feedback on the brief evaluation that should pop up when you exit Zoom. Please tell us how you think today went, and if you would like to see any future webinars, go ahead and type those ideas in as well. We really do look at these surveys and really appreciate them. Thank you, Jessica, and thanks everyone for joining us.